But yeah. Now, usually what I like to do is I like to talk about different aspects of Iceberg. But here's the thing. I know a lot of you guys already know a lot about Iceberg. So instead of telling you guys things that you know, I thought I'd maybe highlight some of the exciting things to come. So one of my favorite daily readings is the Iceberg dev list, right? Isn't it just fun to subscribe there and just read the conversations and see what's coming, what proposals are being put out there? So what I did here is just compile some of the more recently discussed proposals and just kind of summarize them and just to talk about them so we make you aware of them. Now, make sure you have your phones out. There's gonna be a lot of QR codes. So if you want to capture anything, be ready. Actually, to save yourself the most time, scan this QR code. This will take you to a Google folder with all my slide decks, not just for this presentation, but all my presentations. So that way you have all the slides and all the QR codes that come with them. And then again, if you see a presentation in there that you're interested in watching, it's probably on YouTube somewhere. Okay, so there's always more. Oh, let me go back one more slide. There we go. Just give you guys one more second to scan that if you need to. Cool. Okay. So again, we're talking about Apache Iceberg proposals. Again, my name is Alex Merced. I'm a senior tech evangelist at Dremio. A little bit about me. I've worked as a web developer. I've worked in data roles for companies like GenEd Systems, Campus Guard, General Assembly. One of the co-authors of Apache Iceberg, the definitive guide. I like to write code for fun. Like it was one weekend I was really bored and I decided to write a document database in JavaScript for fun. That's called SensioDB. It's in the Node repository. It's fun. It was something I did. Yeah, I like to do things. And while we have a few copies here physically today, if you want a free copy of the digital book, you can also scan this QR code. If you already got the presentation slides, you can scan that later on if you want. But yeah, that'll get you a free copy of the physical book. Also, right now I'm doing a series of basically an Apache Iceberg like a crash course. So if you know people who want to learn, like who are still learning about Apache Iceberg and want to get that kind of crash course, they can go here. We're already 2 sessions in, but when you register, you get access to the on-demand version as well. It's free. It's basically, I think the first lesson we did was what's a data lakehouse? What are table formats? Then we did like, what are the 3 different formats and what's their architectures? And now we're gonna get deeper and deeper into Iceberg going forward. And I host a lot of podcasts. As you can tell, I talk a lot. So these are all on iTunes and Spotify. Feel free to subscribe to hear me talk about not just Iceberg, but Apache Arrow, Nessie, all sorts of really cool technologies. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the proposal for versioned SQL UDF. So this comes out of like an evolution of the view spec. So basically with the view spec, you can sit there and say, now you have this object, it's a view, and then we sit there and say, okay, here's this SQL that is associated with that view. But what would be nice is to have that materialized view. So we can have that same feature you have in other database systems, but have it portable in the Iceberg ecosystem. But there's been a long discussion sort of on how to do that. And part of that has been just basically deciding, like, do we want to create a new object called the materialized view, or do we want to use the objects we already have, which seems to be the direction that we're going in, where basically you're combining a view with a table. Okay, so that's one conversation that's going. Here you can see it summarized. When you see the QR codes on each of these slides, that'll actually take you a link directly to that email conversation on the email list where you can read that whole conversation. Okay, so that's one conversation that's going, but basically but that's evolving now into this conversation that's about taking that views that, I mixed 2 things. I went into materialized views when I'm talking about SQL UDFs. Woo, you can tell it's been a week, okay. Okay, so basically, I spoiled the story a little bit later on, so I'll fill that in when we get there. But basically, what we're doing here is kind of evolving from the view spec. What we want to do is go into basically do something similar, but for SQL UDF. So not only do you have the definition of views as something that can be an object within Iceberg, but also have like SQL functions. And generally, ones that are defined, looks like the conversation is more like ones that are defined in SQL, not Python. So basically, what you're doing is you can just have basically SQL-based functions sort of defined, so that way you can have the same definition of the same function. Now, again, this gets into along the same view that different things have different dialects. So even in the view spec, you have that property that's like dialect, so that way you can track the dialect. So you can use things like SQLglot to translate it. But it's a work in progress. I think it'll be really cool. It'd be nice to be able to use the same function from place to place. But again, there's also all these challenges like, are certain processes implemented the same way from engine to engine? But any step closer to incentivizing more and more unification and standardization is always good. Here's the part that I spoiled, the materialized view proposal. Again, originally a discussion of how do you structure those materialized views, whether, create a new object, and the direction it's going in, again, is a view plus a table. Since I kind of already gave you that story, I will move on, but there's the QR code. Okay, this one actually was really, when I first read this one, I was pretty excited about it. So the idea is this, like basically you have all these metadata tables that you normally would query in an Iceberg, and you would get this metadata about like partitions, about the history of the table, about the snapshots of the table, great for auditing what the table is doing. But usually you have to do that through your query engine. And so basically you could be using like Dremio, Trino, Snowflake to access these metadata tables. But what if I just wanted to get it without having to go through my query engine? So the idea was setting up the endpoints needed for a server to actually build a catalog server to build that capability within the server side. So that way I could just use the REST API to go hit that REST catalog server and say, hey, can you give me that metadata tables? Now the question is like, hey, is a catalog server gonna be powerful enough to give you that metadata for like large tables? So do you need to pre-materialize that? So this is the kind of conversation like, how do you practically end up doing that? Although once that's all hashed out, that will be really cool. Because I can think of all sorts of cool situations where you could set up just sort of side processes for automating maintenance of the table that could take advantage of. Okay, this is about requiring the NDV property for theta sketches and Puffin files. So the idea here is basically they want to make sure that this field is required because it can make it faster to read. And bottom line is one of the concerns is like, to make this change, are you changing the spec? Are you changing the spec of the Puffin file? Are you changing the spec of a theta sketch? Like, so basically there's some discussion sort of like, what is the exact change that needs to be to actually make this, because everyone seems to want that to be required because it would make life a lot easier. But the question is like, what's the best way to do it that causes the least amount of friction going forward? So that's that one. Also a really fascinating one. So this started out, this one's constantly changing. Oh, let me go back. Nope, that's going forward. Backward. Let's do this. I got it. Let's see here. Cool. Okay. So basically Hadoop catalog, again, the file system catalog, again, originally built to be used specifically on Hadoop. That's why it's called Hadoop catalog, but we use it for all file systems, right? Good times. Really easy way to get started with Iceberg. Oh, I did it again. But the point, is that the problem is there's not all file systems have the same guarantees. So while perfectly safe to use on Hadoop, not really safe in most other places, but people like to use it everywhere. Okay, and then when you start having multiple writers, you get into these other issues. So basically a conversation started up saying, hey, I can write like a better locking mechanism for Hadoop catalog, and that might make it safer for other use cases, but basically saying, hey, there's these other problems with this approach. And basically now the conversation is sort of moving towards deprecating it. So it's an interesting conversation that's going on the mailing list right now, but I always just love listening to conversations back and forth because it comes up every once in a while about a Hadoop catalog and sort of like, what do you do with it? Because it is sort of like, it's like when you, especially if you're like just first starting using Iceberg the first couple of times, it's the easiest thing to do. You can just go write some tables right to your file system. So it's really easy. But then people, when you give people an easy way to do the wrong thing, sometimes they also default to doing that easy way all the time. Because you'll see that, I even see that in something in practice where people just like being able to write files to their file system and then just kind of default to that when there's so many benefits and guarantees they get when they use an actual catalog service versus just going directly to the file system. Okay, the REST server capabilities proposal. This one had a lot of conversation, and it's still going. But basically the idea behind this is not everyone, so there's basically two specifications now. So, well, there's actually several specifications now in the Apache Iceberg projects because you have the specification of the Iceberg metadata, And then you have the specification for the Iceberg REST catalog, the interface that all catalogs will talk to. But the conversation here is like, hey, how about we add this functionality of being for a server to basically declare its capabilities. Like these are the things that this catalog supports. The idea being is that if the server can tell the client ahead of time, the server you connected to supports X, Y, and Z, then it can not have to wait till it's like mid through a process to find out it doesn't support X. So you save the time of like, let's say I'm trying to write, but this catalog doesn't support write. I write the data files, I do all this stuff, and then I go to the catalog, the commit, the actual change to the new snapshot, and it turns out, oh, the catalog won't let me write. And I didn't find out till then. So how much time did I spend writing those data files that could have been saved had I known ahead of time? The question is, how do you do this in a way that doesn't require, that keeps flexibility alive? Because what happens when you want to add more REST endpoints to the REST catalog or more capabilities, you have to keep changing what are these possible capabilities you can declare. So the basic discussion is like, do we do this by endpoint? Like which endpoints do you support? Or groups of endpoints, which may be easier, but then you always have to, every time you add a new endpoint, you have to kind of figure out which capability or create a new capability it falls into. So the discussion's been kind of balancing those wants and needs. But overall, a fascinating conversation. And on another exciting one, like even though I put the slides together, I still get excited when I rethink through the experience. Okay, you can spend I spend too much time thinking about this stuff. But this is basically the conversation here is about creating a framework for defining like privileges around the objects you have in your Iceberg, but that are native in Iceberg, so that way you can actually start having portable governance, like expressing like, hey, you can only write to this table, or you can read to this table, or other things like that. And basically, they started going back and looking at like historical standards. So it was like a lot of really interesting stuff about some of those like historical ways of sort of expressing that language of how do you express those different sort of tiers of privilege. I found this one to be a pretty fascinating conversation. But the idea is that once you have that language in place, then you can start building the mechanisms to create that sort of portable governance, or a mechanism to standardize how that governance could be expressed by different catalogs for, well, governance. Cool. So again, told you it was a quick presentation. Now, again, I'm from a company called Dremio. So of course I gotta make sure I mention that. But basically at Dremio, what we are is we're a lakehouse platform. We make it easy to connect all your data wherever it is. So basically if you want to join your Snowflake tables with tables you have on Hadoop, you can do that. If you want to get hands-on and just kind of see what it does, that's QR code on the left. We'll actually just let you spin it up on your laptop with the Docker, and you'll, in a few minutes, kind of get hands-on and see what it's like. And then here are some more tutorials that do the same thing, where you start off with data in like Postgres, SQL Server, or Mongo, and then build all the way to dashboard, just to kind of see what the whole process looks like. But otherwise, thank you. I will give this back to Jonathan, and we'll deal with the books in a moment.
I think I see a question in the audience for Alex.
Yes. Yep.
That row level security type things or data masking, like what sort of policies are used for that layer?
I think the initial conversation was the table level. I don't know if they were getting more granular yet. I think this initial stage, I don't know how deep, but I have to go back to see the thread to see how deep they were going. But I think that's where it's starting, but it could always go deeper. Cool. Any other questions? Yep.
How is it happening for data? How does Iceberg integrate with Snowflake or other without those like standards?
Oh, well, there's a standard set of endpoints that were initially created, but there's no way, like if I create a catalog, I can choose which of those endpoints I implement. So in that case, what happens, I may implement like all the read ones, but not the write ones. So then what happens is that the client will just attempt to do the transaction, assuming that you have implemented that endpoint. And if you haven't, it'll just fail. And it'll be up to the server to maybe give back some sort of error, or the client will give you some sort of error, but it won't find that out till it tries. So, and then some of those operations, it's going to do a lot of other things before it actually gets to that point. So then you've wasted kind of all that time. So right now, there isn't really a way to prevent wasted time. Correct, because yeah, basically the assumption right now, when you connect via REST catalog, the client is assuming that all endpoints are implemented, even though they may not be.
Right, thank you so much again, Alex. Just wanted to do a few closing remarks before we end today's meetup. Just wanted to recap what we've been through, right? We've talked about the variant proposal. We talked. Roy was able to talk about the calls to action for being able to enable this CDC workload on Iceberg, and Alex had just talked about all of the different active proposals that have been going on. And I think that one of the things that we can do here in this meetup is to know about all of these active proposals and to contribute back your thoughts on them. I think that this is a great opportunity for us to get involved, to have a voice in the community, because, well, the Iceberg community isn't really a community unless people actually talk about it. So yeah, I wanted to make sure that you guys are all aware that the dev list is a thing, and for some reason, the Apache Foundation doesn't believe that anything lives beyond the email threads. So if you have anything to contribute, please go look up the variant support proposal. Look up all of the things that Ron had mentioned to enable CDC on Iceberg, and see what you can do to give an opinion on this. And I think that we have a chance to kind of push forward some of these proposals, accelerate the actual Iceberg implementation to something bigger and greater. So thank you there. The meeting recordings, if you didn't notice, I was struggling with the recordings today. So we are recording this, and we will be uploading the MP4s to the Meetup page. So you can look at the prior Meetup page and take a look at last Meetup and this Meetup as well. We are currently in talks with, also on the dev list, about how in the world to go and upload these to YouTube. And then we will also be doing future updates over email. So you can scan this QR code. I have been inspired by you, Alex, to put in QR codes everywhere. And you can also meet up with us on the Apache Iceberg Slack on Meetup Seattle. So you can get some updates on the next meetup that we're going to be hosting. And related to the future meetups, if you are interested in hosting one of these meetups, we are looking for hosts, and where our hope is that this is going to engage the Iceberg community, so we can kind of share this load, share our thoughts, and hopefully see each other's offices. That would be pretty cool. So yeah, this is the QR code for the host sign up. You can also find it on the Meetup page. So scan that or go to the Meetup page if you want to sign up to be a host for a future Meetup. And with that, I think that is it. Thank you guys for attending. We have the space until 8 p.m., so feel free to loiter around, talk to folks, and thank you all again for coming. You guys are the community, so thank you for making all of this possible. All right, thank you.